Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a police! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Tip Sheet Podcast. It's a wee bit wet this week as we start recording, but as always, I'm your host, John, also known as 4020, joining me to break down all of the action in the Jersey Flegg, New South Wales Cup and NRL is my good mate, Sixties. Like I said, big fella, it's just a tad bit wet today. It's been raining through the night, raining this morning, and maybe it's for the best that the Parramatta Eels are in Canberra this weekend.
Yeah, mate, sorry for us kicking off a little bit late this morning in this recording. I've been busy with finding a pair of animals in each category to load into the ark. It's been quite a job, and it's meant I've delayed this by about 15, 20 minutes. So my apologies there, but we press on with getting through this wet weather locally. And as you said, probably a good thing that the Eels are down in the nation's capital for this weekend, because there's going to be some waterlogged grounds around Sydney this Saturday and Sunday.
And the irony being, of course, that junior reps were delayed 1 week into the finals for the wet round to make up for a missed game. So I think that missed game might have involved Melbourne. So maybe that game's down in Melbourne. If that's the case, that'd be very lucky. But yeah, it'd be pretty terrible to have that game washed out again. Before we go any further, those 60s, a quick shout out to the sponsors of the Tip Sheet, Big Swing Golf, North Mead, and Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan, and of course, Parramatta. Thanks to those two companies for helping us at the Cumberland Fro with our podcast and everything on our website. And before we go even any further after that and get into the previews, got a nice little bit of good news for the NRLW 60s, our mid-season acquisition in season 2023, who was a very talented young player from the Canterbury Bulldogs. Boss Kapua has actually re-inked a new deal with the Parramatta Eels that will see her through to the end. It's a 3-year extension, so it should be for this year, next year, and the year after, I believe. Or maybe the year after that too. But either way, it's a very handy re-signing there, and Boss Kapua, in the little that we saw her alongside Lindsay Tui last season, 60s, certainly caught our eyes and will be one of the important young building blocks for this NRLW team as they move forwards under their new coach.
Yeah, we'll talk with Steve Georgalis more on this next week. But just from our perspective, she was a player that we noticed playing Tasha Gale against the Eels. It was a very encouraging pickup. And I guess it follows the theme of the Eels locking in some of their brightest young stars, so that what they're aiming for is that future of the club. So when you've got her joining the likes of Tyler Amiatu and Cassie Toihiku, you're talking about players who are going to be in the NRLW for quite some time. And I think, as I said, that's good for the club and fits in with the development club ethos.
Yep. All right, mate, let's keep it rolling and jump into the first of the 3 games on the weekend. It is a triple header against the Canberra Raiders, all 3 games taking place in Canberra, but it's not a triple header at GIO Stadium. The first game being the Jersey Flegg. That's been played at Raiders Belconnen. So I imagine that's some sort of auxiliary training facility or their auxiliary ground there for the Flegg. 12 o'clock p.m. kickoff for this one. Unfortunately, no broadcast of this. New South Wales Rugby League TV doesn't cover Jersey Flegg, if I'm not mistaken. And this game sees the winless Eels taking on the undefeated Canberra Raiders. So just a little bit of a golf there in terms of results. We look at the Eels, they line up like this, 60s at fullback, Arpa Tweedle. We've got Araz Namba and Charlie Sorovi on the wings. Michael Abdo making his season debut in the centres alongside Dom Destratus, a couple of back rowers there in the centre free quarter line, which is probably a sign of the backline depth being tested in Jersey Flegg. Riley Smith will reprise his role at 5'8". He'll partner Joshua Lynn. Sam Tuivasa, Teakin Brown starting props. Patrick Spence is at dummy half. Will Latu, Jock Brazel, and Max Tupou are the back rowers. from 11 to 13 there. On the interchange, Yaya Ayachi is the dummy half rotational player. Lachlan Mears-Crab, LeBron Tuala, and Lance Forlima, the big boppers in rotation. 2 reserves named this week, Will Lewis and Zachary Hunter. And they're taking on the undefeated Raiders, like I said, 60s. Just trying to see if I can spot any really... There is a Afa Masanga in there. It's a blast from the past there. But no prospects that I really note off the top of my head from the Raiders SG Ball team in 2023 that really jump out at me there. I'm sure there are some in that team, but Chevy Stewart, the fullback's playing reserve grade. So, yeah, Eels, they're going to have to cook something here, mate, because they certainly had victory. They were staring it down last week against the West Tigers, but chose to bottle it instead. I mean, obviously they didn't choose, but that was the outcome that was the result of everything.
Yeah, the old cliche about snatching defeat from the jaws of victory.
Yep.
And I don't know how reflective that is of how what the team's mental processes are at, because we know that as much as winning, it can become a habit, so can losing. So you've got a team that's undefeated against a team that's yet to win a game, and it's not the best position for the Eels to be coming into when they're looking for that first victory of the year. Now, last weekend we had Para through and through out at Cabramatta to cover the game and send through updates to us. He felt there was a combination of some average play towards the end, along with some tough calls that the Eels were receiving that contributed to the loss. But let's just say that if you're up 22-4 with just over 15 minutes to go, something has to, I guess, go terribly wrong for that to turn into a losing situation. And unfortunately, that's what's happened with the Eels. I look at the team and I see talent in that group. I look at the coaching staff, and we've got a NRL player who's just retired in Jordan Rankin, who's going to be bringing that much experience to the team in terms of his own career, where he was the youngest debutant in NRL history. I think he was still, from memory, 16 when he made his NRL debut. And then you're also talking about his assistant coach in Steve O'Day, who has enjoyed great success with the coaching the SG Ball to a title win last year. So they've got the great people to guide the team. And I look at it and I go, as you just pointed out, they've got 2 players who have come through the pathways as back rowers, and they're playing centre. And I think that's probably reflective of that depth chart in the outside backs that afflicts the grades above them as well. So
yeah,
I think
it's a bit of a blind spot, isn't it, for the Parramatta Eels right now? Like it hasn't been aided by, again, injuries to Richard Penasini and Arthur Stephen in the preseason certainly didn't do anything to help us in that regard. But as much as we've got our strengths when it comes to finding value on the forward pack across, the NRL in particular, but other grades too. Right now, it just feels like the back line is a blind spot for our club.
Yeah, and this isn't something which you can cover up, and I don't think the club's not covering up, because they're selecting back rowers in the centres. Like it's as plain as the nose on your face that there are not the options within the club to be able to fill backline positions. So yeah, it's a tough time right now. And then when you look at New South Wales Cup, which we'll get onto, we've got players outside of the top 30 and outside of top 30 and development who are filling the outside back roles in New South Wales Cup. So, I mean, we're literally talking about players who are too old for Jersey Flegg and are outside of the NRL full-time squad who are in those positions. So that's the reality of where the club is at in terms of outside back options, and it's being reflected in a 0-4 start for both grades, because both grades have the forward stocks to be at the very least competitive, but the outside back stops through, the stocks for outside backs ends at NRL. And I mean, there's an argument to be said about, where a player like Sivo's at as a first choice option on the wing in NRL, but we'll get into that when we're talking about the NRL. But yes, it's really hard to be tipping the Eels to win this, and that grates at me. That hurts my very core. That there needs to be. I don't even know how to try to articulate what needs to happen with the grade, with the Jersey Flegg team. I guess they really have to step up and completely control the middle.
Yep.
Like they just have to. I mean, they have to. When I say completely control, I mean they have to own the middle.
Yeah, you're looking for your middle forwards to just be winning the advantage line pretty much every set, and that's a tough ask.
Yes, and because when we're talking about players being out of position at centre, we're not just talking about where it takes away an attack. The defending as a centre is a tough ask as well. So, look, I feel for the team. I feel for the coaches with what the options are. I guess I'm hoping that they can take a positive out of last week in that they were in a position to win and not focus on the fact that they ended up losing the game, but they played some bright attacking football. And I should mention that at this stage as well, because the tries that they were scoring, where they were in control 22-4, were fantastic. And they did probably leave a couple of tries out there as well where mistakes were made and could have been leading by a greater margin. I guess they have to focus on, look, this is what we did. This is what we were able to control. And it was said to me about how well Josh Lynn played at halfback last week, that he was quite a dominant force out there, easily played his best game of the season, which is encouraging to have someone in the spine that's doing that. We've got Arpa Twiddle was out last week. He returns to fullback. So we've got that there. Riley Smith has had a good season playing out of dummy half, and they're going to rely on him as well to continue that good form. We're always big fans of Paddy Spence and what he brings to the team, and he's a genuine utility player, and he's now been starting dummy half the last couple of weeks. So let's just see what we can get out of that team, because when you've got the likes of Sam Tuivasa, Patrick Spence, Will Latu, Jock Brazel, and Max Tupu in the starting team, and when you can bring on big units like LeBron and Lance off the bench, we know what's there in the forwards. We know the quality of that. So it's just a matter of, and we're not. And by the way, we're not suggesting, like, we're huge fans of Dom Destratus and his brother Raf, right? They're back rowers.
Yeah, it's not an attack on them, isn't it? Like Dom's coming in and he's going to do as good a job as he can, But the reality
Yes.
is he's a back rower.
Yeah, and same for his other centre partner,
Michael
Michael Abdo,
Mm-hmm.
who we watched playing the back row in junior reps. So anyway, good luck to them. I would say if they secure a win in this particular game, it could well turn out to be season defining for them. Set them on that path of self belief, I think. So anyway, we move on now to the New South Wales Cup, mate.
Yeah, Flegg certainly entered that contest as firm outsiders. Likewise, in the New South Wales Cup 60s, Eels still chasing their first win of the season after having multiple chances to get it round 1 and round 4 in particular. They very much had the wins in their fingertips, in their hands, and let it slip through. But they're taking on the second place Canberra Raiders in this grade. Canberra was also a good start in the 2 lower grades there this year. You can catch this one on New South Wales Rugby League TV if you do have that subscription or the free trial available still. And the Eels look like this 60s. There are changes this week, but one change that hasn't been made, and this is an encouraging one, is at fullback, Ethan Martin getting a chance to reprise his role after making his debut there last week against the Western Suburbs Magpies. On the wing, we see Jake Tungor and Samuel Loisiu. In the centres, Morgan Harper, who comes down from first grade. He will be there alongside Zach Sini. In the halves, Dejan Arce and Ethan Sanders. Front row sees Ogden and Makatoa wearing the 8 and 10 respectively. Brendan Hands comes back from NRL and he bumps Matty Arthur back to the interchange. Dan Keir is on one edge, Charlie Geimer the other. Brock Parker gets his first start this year after playing from the interchange through, I think, all games. And he'll be in the number 13. As I mentioned before, Matty Arthur is on the bench. He's got the number 14 on his back, making his... Is this his cup debut? It is, isn't it? 60s. He was one of the Flegg players to get a little cup of coffee in cup last year.
No.
Saxon Pryke making his well-deserved cup call up here, being a shining light in that tough start to the Jersey Flegg. Keen to see what Saxon can do here. Tony Mattielli and Reece Alderton round out the interchange. No reserve listed this week. Not that's going to be too much of an issue, but I'm sure they'll have one on ground in case of concussions. And they're taking on a Canberra Raiders team, 60s. You'll know some of these names: Chevy Stewart, Nick Cottridge, Jed Stewart, K.O. Weeks, Trey Mooney, Zach Wolford, Emery Gula. Then there's Puru, who was pretty good in the preseason trial against us at lock forward, and Peter Holler in the interchange is another handy player too. So you can see why Canberra are pretty highly seeded coming into this game. Got a very solid team across the park. The Eels, well, they just got to take care of their own business first, but got to stop getting in their own way, 60s. And when you have wins against the Bulldogs and the Magpies, not all but banked, those two teams that we were taking on were scoring plenty of points in the contest, but they had, especially against the Tigers, the Magpies, that very healthy second half lead that they just squandered away. Got to do better.
Yeah, look, it was a combination of, I thought, a really poor sequence of play around that 11, 12-minute mark that led to the Eels not touching the ball again for the rest of the game. And I think it kicked off with one of the players getting his hand to a kick.
Yeah, there was a little chip kick like near halfway. It might have been Ogden. It was one of the big boys who just reached out to grab it and tipped it up, and it got plucked back by the kicker, and that was like the little rock that started the avalanche of possession for the Magpies.
Yes, and then I think I can't remember whether it was later in that sequence, because it was one of those sequences where there was 6 agains, there was passes that the Magpies were throwing that were going to ground but bouncing up into their hands. I can't remember whether it was that set or one of the ones after where we had a chance to regain possession and Woody gathered the ball 5 metres out from his line and then was looked to offload.
Yes.
The tackle,
yep.
And I don't know why, and the ball came free and I think it was ruled a knock on, so it was then a scrum to Wests and it continued the possession. I think a try followed, but it was just everything went to muck in that last 11, 12 minutes, and without possession, it was completely dictated by the Magpies. So at least 2 games this year, the Eels should have had them in the bank. And it could be said as well that they had some dominant passages against Manly. Their feeder team, the Workers Sea Eagles, not Manly, and even in their loss to Penrith, they had periods in that game where they were dominant as well. What I can say is there were players out there last week that didn't deserve to be on the losing side, particularly Matt Arthur and Ethan Sanders, who were probably 2 of the best on the field. Not far behind them as well was Charlie Geimer, who I thought had a really good game. So most unfortunate that they dropped the 2 points last week, because it's awful to be 0-4 at this time of year. And it's not going to be, the Raiders won't be easy beats. And we just spoke about it with the depth chart. So Samuel Luizio, who's well known to Eels supporters because he has previously had a top 30 contract, he didn't get to do an NRL preseason with the Eels because he was doing it with the West Tigers. He's returned to the Eels, but he sits outside the NRL full-time squad now. So he's basically a part-time player with the club. Same with Jake Tungo. And
Samuel's more of a centre than a winger as well. I think that's going to possibly be exploited on the weekend by a pretty good Canberra backline.
Yeah, and Ethan Martin also sits outside the Eels' top 30 and development squad and is a part-time player as well. He was able to do 6 weeks of an NRL pre-season this year, and that's going to contribute to his future development. And he's on contract as well, where next year he'll have a longer NRL preseason. So he's obviously a player that the club has targeted to have a bit of a future. But the fact remains that there's 3 players in the back line who sit outside the full-time squad. And although all clubs will face this with their feeder teams, that there's going to be supplementary players that have to be added to it, it's telling that we're at the early part of the season, and there are players who are becoming regular members of this team and they're not able to train full-time with the team. Because that's the other thing that needs to be pointed out, is that the remainder of the team, Brock Parker's not part of full-time training. He did a little bit of an NRL pre-season, and Reece Alderton as well. So you've got players like that aren't part of the full-time squad. And so the only time they get to have a run is at a session later in the week, or the captain's run. That's it. They're not as familiar with their teammates. It almost makes the team, when you've got a larger number of players who aren't training full time, it almost harkens it back to being like the old semi-professional days, or a club team where the players get to come together, once or twice a week and then have a run on the weekend. So it's a tough ask, and it says a bit about our depth chart as well. So, look, we've got, and let's rip the Band-Aid off. There's 3 spots currently available to the club right now. And I'm not sure what they're doing. There may not be the 3 spots at the moment. They may have elevated a development squad player, a development contracted player into the top squad. And it hasn't been announced. I don't know. But if that's happened, then there'd be an opportunity for someone to be elevated to development contract spot, you would think, which then would give them the chance to be training full time. So, look, I haven't seen as much training as I normally like to. I've had plenty of other commitments going on, but mate, it's a tough ask, isn't it? Right now.
Yep. And the real joy of watching this team right now has been a handful of the young guys there, and you mentioned obviously Buds, and for me in particular Buds and Guymer, because they've got a pretty clear future at the club. And Ethan Sanders, I rate massively 60s. We've covered him for a long time through Harold Mount's SG Ball, and I'm still excited about his future. But we know that he's been reticent to re-sign for the club because he sees a bottlenecked pathway to NRL, and I understand that. But he had his best game of the season last week against the Magpies, so good to see there. Going to be fun to watch Ethan Martin go around against 60s. I know you mentioned he's not part of the top 30, but he did bring something a little bit different to the back line against the Western Suburbs, and he wasn't perfect. There was some issues, or an issue under the high ball late in the game, but I think he definitely brings something different with his speed and agility to the back line. So that's where following the reserve grade has been, good for me this year, is seeing these young guys go around, and now we get another one in Saxon Pryke. So yeah, that's, obviously development is the bigger priority over success, but you also do need a little bit of success, don't you? Like, you need to have, some winning happening in a Flegg and Cup, and right now it's not. So they need to find a way to kickstart that, and it's a tough week to try and do it. First place Raiders in the Flegg, second place Raiders in Cup. And and look, like I said, the Cup have actually shown some. The only game they really weren't in this season so far was the second half of Penrith, and then in round 3 they took on the Sea Eagles, and they lost 40-20. But even then, that game they had a bit of a comeback around half time. So it's not like, unlike the Flegg, who've had some pretty tough results go against them in terms of a lack of scoring. The Cup team are scoring, and they're in positions to compete. They just need to, close out games now. So maybe
there's definitely some defensive woes on the edges that the Cup is suffering from. But and just quickly, I want to say, when you're looking at someone like Ethan Martin, you're looking at a real diamond in the rough there. His experience at fullback has come, I believe, in union rather than league. So it seems that they're looking to develop him in that area because he was playing fullback in Ron Massey Cup. So that may well be the long-term goal there. But we've seen his step and his ability to beat a player one-on-one with that step. It's quite lethal. It's the old ankle breakers, isn't it, for a defender?
Yeah.
So he's got some positional play to master.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's understandable because it is such a specialised role, that fullback role.
Oh, it's so demanding in the modern game. I mean, the halves are smarter than they've ever been. Dummy halves kick better than they ever have. So you've got to be constantly on alert and vigilant to the threat of the kick.
We saw Ethan robbed of 2 tries in his first game last week. The one where it was pulled back for an obstruction, which was, there's been a lot said about those obstruction calls in the NRL.
Yeah. The runner went through the line, and the defender chased him behind the line.
Yeah,
the line of gain.
Like literally tackled him from behind.
Yeah,
after he ran through the line, and so it was deemed that was interference, and we're talking about a play which was within the red zone, so it's not like the defender was going to get anywhere near the try scorer. So that was tough. And then it was a borderline forward pass call to Ethan when Buds went back across behind with a pass behind the ruck. So you're talking about there's a player in between them, which was the player that had played the ball was going to limit the capacity for a forward pass anyway, because for those that didn't see it, Buds went to take off to the right-hand side, and then in confusing the defence there, he passed back behind the ball to Ethan Martin, who was coming through on the left side.
Yep.
And it put Ethan through a hole, and he was in open territory with the fullback in front of him, and we know what he's capable of beating a player one-on-one, even in closed spaces. So in open space, it was going to be interesting to watch. But the referees pulled it back as he's hit the afterburners, and it was disappointing because I would have liked to have seen what transpired from there. But he injected something extra in the Eels attack.
100%, yeah.
This week. What we need is for the players to step up in defence. I think having Morgan Harper drop back, because, look, people have been critical of Morgan in first grade, and I think it's been unwarranted because he's actually shut down tries from opposing teams in the last couple of weeks. And we've spoken before about how tough it is that when you're making when you're making a tackle on a player and the pass is thrown into you in the act of tackling, that's deemed different to getting your hand deliberately onto a kick and knocking a kick down. It's a really tough call, that particular rule in rugby league. So sure, if you get your hand to a pass and deliberately are knocking it down, that's one thing. And yes, there are players who are making a play at the ball while they're making a tackle. But if you're making a tackle and the ball gets knocked down, geez, it's a tough call to have that rule to knock on or six again. So anyway, bit of criticism about him, but I think he will add some stability and certainly experience out in the back line. That's much needed, I think.
One quick question for you, 60s. Obviously, Brendan Hands comes back to reserve grade this week, put into dummy half, which I think is his primary position now, at least as an Eel. And it's where, he plays most of his first grade football. Do you like the configuration through the back line and spine that sort of is there this week? I mean, you could have put Brendan Hands, you being operative as a coach here, you could have put Brendan Hands into the 5'8" position, bumped Dejan Arce into the centres, put Zach Sandy onto the wing, left Matty Arthur at dummy half. Do you think that getting Brendan Hands more minutes at dummy half is probably their priority right now, though, and just keep him in as match fit as possible in case he needs to take on a bigger load in the NRL anytime in the immediate future? Knock on wood, that something happens to Joey Lussick.
Well, for a start, I think Matt Arthur's going to get a lot more minutes than what Minnie Luke did coming off the bench. I think he will be injected into the game to maybe, if not impose a bit of control around the ruck, a bit of something extra in attack. I also think that it opens up Brendan Hands to not necessarily be substituted off the field, but maybe there's a rotation that will occur elsewhere. Like, for example, maybe he goes into the halves when the rotation's there and Arce goes into another backline position. And perhaps when that first interchange is made, that it stays that way for the rest of the game. Just a thought that I have there. I haven't seen them train. I've got no inside word on what would happen there, but that would be my guess, because you're not going to leave Buds Arthur, who has probably been the best player on the field in every single match that he's been involved in New South Wales Cup this year. You're not going to leave him sitting on the bench for half the game or longer. He's going to be, I suspect that in a different way, like how we would see in first grade, Ryan Madison injected into a game after the first 20 minutes and then remain out there. And then there's interchanges that work elsewhere with the other players. I wouldn't be surprised if it works that way with Buds.
And in a way too, a bit of time on the bench isn't the worst thing for Matt Arthur, and that's not that's not a form thing or anything like that. But his path to first grade 60s probably starts as a rotation dummy half, and that's not right now, but down the road. And having the ability to come on and dominate a game from the interchange, that's going to be key for him in that regard.
Yeah, and I think that's probably well noted by you. And the thing about Buds is, and I mean, we know this simply because of how much we've watched him over the years, is that he's a student of the game. He's one of these players who's always thinking ahead. So if he's there on the sideline watching what another team's about and getting a feel of the game from the sideline, he's perhaps going to be even more dangerous being injected into the game. So I can see that there's a positive side to the way he's being used this week, although maybe a lot of supporters will look at it and go, well, I just don't understand that. I think maybe between us we've covered some of the goals that the club is looking for with that change. So, again, I'm going to be like I am with the Flegg team. It's hard to pick a team that's yet to win a game against a formidable opponent. I'm simply going to be hoping that all the players perform to their best and we get the team being able to secure their first win of the season.
Bit of a theme this weekend thus far, isn't it? I agree. It's going to be tough sledding against the Canberra Raiders in the New South Wales Cup. It's going to be on the players to be real sharp in this contest. And I suppose the only thing I want to say beyond that, 60s, is best of luck to the debutant, Saxon Pryke. Tough, aggressive forward. He's going to find his feet in the cup sooner rather than later, and it might just start.
Great motor too. Got to mention it. Great motor. Like he's a middle forward who can play and has been playing 70 minutes in the Jersey Flegg. He will, he's coming off the bench with this, but he'd be capable of being brought into the game and staying out there for a while. So, great player in the making.
Yes, indeed. And that brings us to the main event, as always, the final part of our preview podcast, and that is the NRL clash in round 5, 6:15 p.m. kickoff on Sunday. God, I hate that time slot, 60s. I don't like it. But the Eels playing in this one, it's 8v9 on the ladder. The Eels actually pumped out of the top 8 by a solitary point of for and against because of that 1-point field goal in the game against the West Tigers. So a chance for the Eels to get back into the 8 this week, and they're taking on a Canberra Raiders outfit that they've actually started the season pretty well, 60s, but I think it's fair to say that they were more Canberra Faders than Raiders last week against the Cronulla Sharks, up 18-0. I think they ended up losing 32-24 or something in that vicinity. They got absolutely run down by a considerable margin by the Sharks, but they look like this. Still plenty of talent in this team. At fullback, it's Jordan Rapana, James Schiller and Xavier Savage are on the wings, Matthew Tomoko and Sebastian Chris the centres. Ethan Strange, probably the front runner for Dally M Rookie of the Year right now. He's at 5'8", for Jamal Fogarty at 7. Josh Papali'i and Captain Joseph Tapane at the front row alongside Danny Levi. Hudson Young and Ata Mariota are on the wings, the flanks, the edges, in the back row. And the latest English import is Morgan Smithies. He's the lock forward. On the interchange, Tom Starling is their dummy half. Corey Horsburgh, Simi Sasangi and Pasami Solo round out their rotational forwards. Extended roster, Weeks, Kotrich, Mooney, Wolford and Gula. They're a funny team to try and get a read on, Canberra. Plenty of strike, pretty solid forward pack on paper, and a halves pairing that sort of worked together quite well on Strange and Fogarty. But at the same time, they also feel like a team that is beatable.
Yeah, well, when you have a team who was leading 18-0 and then get beaten 36-22 as what happened last week. So just to put that in even more perspective, from 18-0, the score became 36-4. So it was
pretty one-sided run of play.
Yeah, it was. And you know what? They're going to be hurting from that. Indications might have been from the presser that Ricky Stewart was ready to just go hog wild with axings from the team, but I don't think he's made any change at all, has he?
Simi Sasangi, I think, comes onto the interchange. I'm not sure at the expense of whom. Maybe Gore? Or Zach Hoskins. Zach Hoskins out, that's why.
Yep. So that's it. So apart from an enforced change, that's basically it. So he's given them a shot at redemption. And I guess that's going to be a mark of where their head's at. If they do take advantage of that shot at redemption, we know that there's certain players in the Raiders team who love to mess up the Eels in games. Like Danny Levi will pull something out of his ass, as he did in that trial.
The kick.
So they do have to watch him there, because he is one of those dummy halves that enjoys chancing his hand, and he seems to come up with some sort of freak play every time he plays us. Jordan Rapana, when he was on the wing,
You used to dread that matchup going back to Semi Radradra.
Oh, yeah, like he was an opponent who absolutely owned Semi every time the Eels lined up against the Raiders. I used to say, I'm sure that he gets out the calendar and circles the match against the Eels for his big starring moment of the season, because he used to toy with Semi. Like he would make Semi look ridiculous in defence. So, like, he had zero idea. And there were times where Semi used to have his struggles in defence, but Jordan Rapana used to make him look silly. He'd use the slightest bit of turf on the outside of Semi to do him in every time. And I think a player like Xavier Savage almost sums up the Raiders, in that he's one of those rocks and diamonds players, and he can manage to find diamonds when he plays against us. And we just have to hope that he and a couple of his cohorts find the rocks this week, because, we've got a team that you'd have to think we're going to be down in confidence for this week. And I think the Raiders would look, both teams are going to be hurting. There's no question about that. I guess what it comes down to might even be the home ground advantage for the Raiders, but we'll talk a bit more about that. Yeah, would you like to run us through the Eels team?
Yeah, well, Ricky Stewart promised changes, like you said, 60s in that post-match presser, but Brad Arthur was the coach that actually delivered them this week. Got a couple of changes through the team here, but at fullback, no change, no surprise there. Captain Clinton Gufferson in the one. Mike Acevo, now there's a player that's probably a bit lucky to hold his spot, but he's got the number 20s back this week with Sean Russell on the opposite flank in number 5. Will Penasini is in the right centre slot, but Bowie Simonson comes in for Morgan Harper at left centre. Blaze Talangi and Dylan Brown reprise their roles in the halves. Front row sees Reagan Campbell-Gillard and Junior Barlaw named. Hopefully there's a change there in terms of putting Junior back to the bench, where he's been so damn good this year. Joe Lussick at dummy half. Sean Lane on the left. Another change here. Ryan Madison starting on the right edge, which allows Jermaine Hopgood to come back into the starting team at lock forward. On the interchange, Luca Moretti, William Gregg making his NRL debut this season, or sorry, seasonal debut, not actual NRL debut, for the Eels. Joe Ofungahi and Kelma Tuolangi. Roster beyond that sees Ogden, RC, Hands, Makatoa, and Harper as the extended players. So yeah, we got three and a half changes, I suppose, because you got the back change with Bowie Simonson, the back row change of Ryan Madison, which also allows Jermaine Hopgood to come back to the starting team, so that's 1.5 changes there. And then Woody McGregor coming onto the bench there is your third full change. 60s. So Brad obviously tinkering with the team in the wake of that loss to the West Tigers. Not wholesale changes, or common sense changes, I think, for the most part. Do you like what he's done, or would you have gone in a different direction, probably most particularly in that back line, I'll ask you?
Well, it's interesting because I had comments sent to me about our fate this week. This is immediately after the loss to the Tigers. You watch, Ricky Stewart's going to be the coach that'll get on the front foot and make changes to the team, and Brad Arthur will just keep trotting out the same players. And what do you know? It was the complete opposite with that. Now, I wait with bated breath for what Brad decides to do in terms of his starting pack and interchange, because I don't think it worked. Well, I know it didn't work last week. Never mind, I don't think it worked. It didn't work last week. We saw what was easily the Junior went from being arguably the form front rower in the competition, coming off the interchange. And what we have to remember is he's not when he was coming off the bench, he's not playing less minutes than he normally played. He was coming out there and becoming a dominant force in the game, like basically determining the direction of the game. And starting the game last week, he was a shadow of that player. And look, he wasn't alone out there. So maybe it's, I don't know, maybe I'm overreading the performance of the players that moved from the bench to a starting position last week. And maybe I should be looking at the entire performance of the pack, because the fact remains that the pack didn't assert themselves in the way that they needed to against the West Tigers team that I think was waiting to be owned.
Yep.
Because we saw how easy the meters were through the middle between the 20-meter lines. It was there was no problem for the Eels advancing the football up through the middle. What Brad talked about in the presser was the Eels trying to fluff their way to a victory, which was basically when we were getting up there, we were going side to side far more than we were in the previous weeks. When we beat Manly the previous week, I said partway through the game, just before the Kelma Tuolungi try, we're about to run over the top of an opponent here. One of the players is just going to charge through and run over the top, and we're about to get a try through the middle. And you could see it building towards that. You could see that the defence was under pressure, that the defence was fatiguing through the physical contact that was happening in that game. And the physical contact did not come last week. And that's with respect to NRL players, because NRL players are putting themselves and their bodies through a tough ask on a weekly basis. But it wasn't to the standard that the Eels deliver every week. And I think we have to look at that as a lost opportunity for an ugly victory.
Yep, agreed. And I think, given the lack of Mitchell Moses, that the ugly victory might be on the cards more often than it isn't for the Parramatta Eels 60s, which brings us to how the Eels look to attack Canberra this week. A lot has been said about Dylan Brown needing to step up and take more responsibility. He sort of did that himself. He came forward and claimed he needs to take more responsibility when it comes to kicking and organising the team. And I don't think that's wrong, but by the same token, I think it's, in a way, it's a flawed procedural process to try and replicate Mitchell Moses in Dylan Brown, or in the absence of Mitchell Moses with Dylan Brown, when, again, it's something that you're trying to create in the aggregate, I think, across, all 13 players on the field at any given time. What do the Eels change about their attack, or at least their philosophy for attack? Do they change anything against Canberra, or is it just a case of, you had the West Tigers on the ropes, and you can put Canberra on the ropes, but when you get to the red zone, you're going to have to be, a little bit more patient, or maybe a little bit less reckless when it comes to playing from dummy half to forward. So I don't know. What do you think is the mindset of the Parramatta Eels as they look to take on the Raiders in Canberra?
You just used the word that I was about to use. What has to change is their mindset, because we saw an impatient team against the West Tigers. We also saw a team that didn't push up in support at times that they needed to, because I got sick of the number of times that Dylan Brown got himself through the line or halfway through the line and looked for support, someone running off him, and it just wasn't happening. So whether it was the inside or the outside of where he'd pushed through, there just wasn't anyone looming up to take a pass. And those half chances are what needs to be converted in the NRL. We didn't do that against a Tigers team that were, I don't know, they seem to be between the 20s, the 20-metre zones, constantly scrambling to hold us. And we threatened to break through so many times just with reasonably simple plays, and then we would get into the red zone and we'd seem to go away from it. Now, a bit of credit to the Tigers' defence, because they're a different proposition in terms of their attitude to defence at this stage of the season. It's a long season. Whether they can maintain that's another question. But man, we've just got to be prepared to roll up the sleeves and own the middle and earn the right to shift that ball a little bit wider. Because if you're just passing it without any plan, and it almost looked like that at times, although I guess the times when they were going for a plan with those wide passes off the scrum, it looked diabolical, didn't it? With the passes that were going to nobody. And I don't know, maybe do you blame someone like Micah for not being in position for a wide pass, or do you blame the pass being thrown to nobody? Who can tell? You'd have to assume that they know that the play's on. You'd have to assume players would be there ready for some of those wider passes. But geez, there were some lost opportunities there in that red zone, weren't there, last week? So for mine, right, we were very clunky in attack, but I come back to the fact that I think mentally we weren't there, and it was that it was just that impatience in the red zone that that made us look as clunky as we did. We're probably going to remain looking a little bit clunky without Mitch Moses, but I think we have to remember that the Eels' strength is in its forwards. It's also there in players like Gutho and Dylan Brown, who are capable of creating something out of nothing. But if they're in there and they're involved in the play, you've got to be up there supporting them. And unless the Eels are prepared to do those sorts of rugby league basics, then we might be in for another long afternoon. I really think we just got to get the basics right against Canberra, John.
Mm-hmm. Blaze Talangi 60s. It is amazing the storylines that can be spat out seemingly at random when it comes to rugby league. But statistically, the odds of him meeting two fellow 5'8" back to back that are both rookies that play the opposite edge to him, so they meet head to head, it's got to be pretty low. I'm not sure it's astronomical, but it's pretty low. But here we are, a week after playing Lockie Galvin, who played left edge for the Tigers, thus meeting Blaze Talangi head to head. He now plays against Ethan Strange, who I believe plays left edge. I know he had a try tonight against the Warriors that I saw playing down the left edge. I think Blaze I think it was a split decision against Galvin right up until Blaze had that one missed tackle that led to the game-winning try. That was a great contest between two young 5'8" there. And I think we're in for the same this week, 60s. And I don't think Blaze needs to change too much, honestly. Like you talk about taking your lumps and learning your lessons. The missed tackle is certainly going to be imprinted on him and what he needs to do later in games to stay switched on defensively. But I like what they allowed Blaze to do in attack last week. He had a pretty open license to run the ball and ball play down that right edge. He probably should have. I know that Gutho had a tough ask on that kick to Will Penasini, but he had a great little play that could have opened up the scoring for the Parramatta Eels very early in that contest, where he played off the back of an offload. And I think that's probably the best way to get him really into this game is maybe looking for that second phase opportunity off the back of our forwards, winning that middle. But with Blaze, I know we've spoken about Dylan Brown taking on extra responsibility to replicate Mitchell Moses. Do you want to see anything else from Blaze, or is him just doing more of the same, more than enough right now?
Isn't it interesting that with those three players that you mentioned, with Strange and Galvin and Blaze Talangi, that you've got three young halves who won't die wondering?
No, in no way. Yeah, the confidence levels on these three are off the charts.
Oh yeah, they back themselves, and that's the mark of a player that's going to have a long career in the NRL. Someone who's prepared to back themselves. And when you have that mindset, you are going to get some errors because you're going to push to take opportunities that are there or to create opportunities. And sometimes it doesn't work out as you plan. And when you're talking about relatively inexperienced players, there's even more likelihood that that's going to occur. What we can't afford to do is to have young players like that who are, I guess that we can't afford to put a harness on those sort of talents. You want to let them play their natural game. And so for Blaze, I just say let him continue to play his natural game. The upshot of that, of course, is that the Eels are playing with 2 5/8s. It's unavoidable to say anything other than that because Dylan is not he's not an organising half. That goes without saying. It's not his. He's got a passing game. He's got some skills that allow him to play as a foil for Mitch Moses and to run one side of the field to take a bit of pressure off Mitch Moses. But in terms of being the main playmaker in the team, I don't. And you know what? We're massive fans of Dylan on TCT, but he's outside of that lane, isn't he? Of being that type of half. We've never seen him own a game as the number one playmaker in the NRL, for the team in the NRL. And I don't expect him to be any different this week. What I think we need to be doing around Dylan Brown is supporting the type of play that he plays. And for me, as I said earlier, that means he's going to create opportunities with his running game. And then off the back of that, he just needs to do what he normally does, which is because a team might look to him to run the ball as his first option, when he decides to pass and go into a playmaking role, he's that much more of a threat. And we spoke about it last week. The reason he's the perfect foil for Mitch Moses is that Mitch Moses plays that organising game so that when Mitch Moses goes for his running game, and we know how fast he is, his running game is that much more of a threat because the opponents are looking to shut down what he's creating rather than, and being less on the lookout for him running, although it's obviously on their tip sheets that, he will run. You can't help but, if he's going to a pass 9 times out of 10 in a game, that time when he goes for the run, it's going to be harder to pick up. And for me, it's the same with Dylan. If he's going to run 9 times out of 10 or 8 times out of 10, when he decides to throw the cutout pass, a defence is less prepared for it. I think they just need for Dylan to play his usual game, but with obviously a little bit more kicking, a little bit more organising around it. And our method of playing just has to have that little bit of adjustment, and the forwards just doing what they normally do. So, mate, I've got naivety as a coach in that regard, but I just think when you've got players that have certain skills, don't try to make them something they're not.
Mm-hmm. I don't disagree. And in that similar vein, if and we know this is a pretty likely if, Dylan is going to be running the ball most of the time. That is his strength. I would call for a slight paradigm shift, and I know that Gufferson has other responsibilities in our conventional attacking structures where he needs to be at different places of the field at different times and sets, and there's like a whole different number of triggers and factors that go there. But I would just park him on Dylan's hip in this game. I would just have Gufferson running as either the sweep option or backing up Dylan for the offload there, because we saw against the West Tigers that Dylan created half a dozen line break opportunities pretty much, but just didn't have the support player running off him. And that's also contingent on Sean Lane too, backing up more aggressively for his 5'8", for halfback in this case. But yeah, I would just move Gufferson into more of an old school fullback role, at least through phases of the game, and try and test the Canberra Raiders in that regard. The other major talking point for me, I know there's a tweak in the back line, but Bailey Simonson at centre, we know what he brings to the team in that regard. But the big one for me, and we talked about it in our sort of mini breakdown of the Tigers game, just saying Junior Barlow, he's starting or named to start. If he goes back to the interchange, though, you got different options this week to pair someone with Reg or someone with Junior. How would you approach it, 60s? Because Reg is a pretty versatile starting bookend. He can be the enforcer. He can be the workhorse. He's not really, I'm going to say the issue. He's the malleable piece in this, puzzle. Who would you pair with Junior between Widdermoo and Joe Offengar? He's probably the question I'm more angling towards you.
Look, the way I see Woody is a player that I believe can only be used in 10 to 15-minute bursts. So if you start a game with Woody, then you got to be prepared for that first interchange to come real early in the game. And then I think we really have to be careful of how we use him, because we can't have him out there if fatigue or long periods of defence are happening, because that's always been his Achilles heel, is that mobility in defence. We know what a difficult proposition he is to pull down when he's carrying the football, but it's that capacity to adjust quickly in defence, and especially if you've got a dummy half in the opposing team that's going to chance his hand with a dart out of dummy half probably multiple times in the game. So, look, I'm thinking that Joe did a really good job last week. I'd be tempted to start the game with Joe Offengowie.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think there's a right answer. I think you could make an argument that you let Reg be the workhorse and Widdermoo be the bludgeon in that opening exchange too, and then let Joe be the by contrast the workhorse to Junior's impact guy. But yeah, I'm going to see where Brad goes with this, because it could end up dictating how the Eels win the ruck. So I have to wait and see on that one.
And can I just add in as well? I was using very much a simplification in talking about how often Moses and Brown will either pass or run.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I mean, like what I'm talking about is the bigger plays in attack, because the halfback, in the way Parramatta structure the ball, they'll get a pass and they'll feed it off to a forward. They might turn them back on the inside, or they might link, just be used in a link role. But when we're talking about the big plays, when a shift comes to the player, when either Moses or Brown pulls the trigger, it's more likely that it's going to be Brown. The trigger that he pulls will be a run, and the trigger that Moses will pull will be to try to look to put a player, get outside his opponent and put a player through the gap with a pass. So that's just on that. And I think the other thing we have to talk about, John, is Micah Sivo. And I think a big selection call this week was who was dropped for Bailey Simonson, because I think it had to be a borderline call between moving Harper or moving Sivo back to New South Wales Cup.
And to be honest, 60s, I would have gone the other way with where Brad went. I think that Morgan Harper, while he hasn't got that high, he hasn't got a plus ceiling, I think he's definitely a solid enough contributor in the centres to warrant holding his place, especially if he tones down some of the aggressive offloading attempts that have been part of his game early on. But he at least has stuck to the game plan and done his job compared to Micah, I think. And
yeah, I think, look, there's what you have to realise as well, what supporters maybe I maybe have to realise this is the wrong way of putting it, but maybe another thing to take into consideration around Morgan Harper is there have been very few opportunities that he's been presented with in attack. And he's also been asked to defend in some less than ideal circumstances. And I think he's for someone who's new to the team, he's still made some positive contributions. People might look at that drop ball towards the end. I'll put more of a blame on Dylan.
Dill didn't put that. He put that on the point of his shoulder. That's all.
Yeah.
He actually did well to catch that through the initial contact. It wasn't until the secondary defender got there that he lost the ball. That was always going to be a tough assignment. And I think you're right in your criticism of Dylan in the post game about that little sequence of play in the second half where there was a tip on and that pass where we just needed to get to kicks. And so hopefully Dill has learned from that this week. And
that's why, and that's where, as I said, I think that Dylan moved away from his natural game there, because I'm thinking I don't remember too many times in the past that Dylan's gone a tap on play, and especially under those circumstances where we were. I think were we against a 12-man team when he was going for that?
Yes, because that was the first set after the penalty goal, right?
Yeah, and then going that hospital pass when we were down to that last couple of minutes of the game, and all we should have been thinking about was to get to the end of the set and drill into the corner and put the pressure on the Tigers to try and come off their line without making a mistake. Like that's game management play right there. So I think Harper was maybe unfairly criticised by some people with that, and he virtually created a try out of nothing if he had have managed to get his foot 6 inches further in field on that first disallowed try. But if we look at Micah, and we've talked about it before, we're not getting anything out of Micah in yardage, because as he meets the defence, his shoulder and hips are pointing to the ground. He's literally surrendering in the tackle. And then last week, Charlie Staines owned him when he was given multiple one-on-one
in the attacking
chances.
half. Yeah.
Now, we could argue that there were a couple of opportunities that were set up for Micah that if the ball was presented to Bailey Simonson in similar circumstances with an overlap or one player in front of him, that he might have been able to do something a little bit more than what Micah did. And we could even come back to the try that Blaze Talangi scored against Manly and say,
does Micah score that try?
Score that try?
Based on what we saw,
Yeah, and the Micah of 2024 doesn't. The Micah from, say, 4 years ago does score that try. Where I don't know what's happened to the big fella. Honestly, I don't. And it's to me, it has to be a mental thing, because he's still got the same physical characteristics, and Micah is, believe it or not, close to the fastest player in the club, if not the fastest player in the club. It's so when you're combining size and pace and power, he still epitomizes what you would like from the modern winger. And there is something where he doesn't have self-belief, or there's something that's going, or self-confidence, but something's going on. And I don't know that he's going to find that belief or confidence at NRL level. So I agree with you. I think probably he needs to find that belief and confidence back in New South Wales Cup. And you know what? And if he doesn't find that belief or confidence, then I don't think we can afford to be selecting him. Micah at his best is an easy selection in first grade.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a no-brainer if he's in full form. But Unfortunately, I thought we'd seen a turning point late last year, where he finished the season last 2 or 3 games quite strongly with good ruck work and good physicality in the red zone, and I thought that maybe that indicated he was going to be back to his best this year, but maybe it was just 1 week and he was off his game coming off that suspension. But this is an absolutely pivotal game for him in terms of his immediate future in NRL. At least that's how I feel. Because Bailey Simonson can play left wing.
And we probably should mention at this stage the extended woes of Hayes Dunster.
Oh, my God. We saw him 60s, well, obviously at the ground on Easter Monday and watching the Reggies play, and we saw him sort of get up and limp at one point, and we're going, oh, no, Hayes, what's he done? And he ended up leaving the field. And that was, I think, was that just before halftime or just after halftime? No, it was before halftime. And,
yep.
And so he played, about 3/4 of the first half, and we thought ankle injury, syndesmosis, ankle, some sort of sprain. Turns out he did what Woody did last year, and it's a Lisfranc fracture in his foot, and he's out until at least round 12. The branching pathways for him since that fateful tackle by Tyrell Fulmiano, it has just been all downhill for him. It is actually insane how much bad luck has been heaped upon this poor kid. From being a breakout player in the NRL the year before that initial injury to, just injury after injury. He has not been able to stay on the field. It is.
Yeah, and if it's not injury, it was documented he had a blood disorder.
That's right.
That
struck
him last year as well.
That struck him down last year. He has been, honestly, like you want to go get a witch doctor or an exorcist or something for him, because he is cursed right now. And
this again goes to where the Eels sit with their 27-player roster, because he's part of that. Mitch Moses is part of that. And so they're down to 25 players as it is. There is a shortage in the backs. So it becomes even wilder, this shortage with injuries. So, there's got to be an SOS call that's going out to add some players to the roster, because I thought last year was going to be as bad as it gets. And I know people don't like having what can be perceived as excuses thrown up. We know the Eels didn't play well enough last year, but we didn't have a full roster at any stage, and we had a run of player unavailability that was second to none in the NRL, and you just feel like there's similar aspects that are happening this year, and it's again striking a part of our roster that we can't afford for it to strike. And unfortunately, it's Hayes is part of it.
The really frustrating part is, and I say frustrating, this isn't because I want to attack anyone, but it's not like you can even point towards strength and conditioning as an issue for the club. It's not like it's Trent Elkin doing a bad job and it's soft tissue damage and guys getting hamstring strains and tears. Bryce Cartwright has a rib injury. Mitchell Moses broke his foot. Hayes Dunster got a nasty hip drop tackle that also broke his foot. This is just straight up bad football luck, and it's been year on year for the Parramatta Eels now. And like you said, 60s, the best clubs, the ones that win premierships, they stay healthy. And even Penrith, they have dealt with injuries in the back half or the back portion of the regular season the last couple of years, but they've always had their squad ready to roll for the finals when it really counts. So the Eels, unfortunately, are starting off 2024 the wrong way with a series of injuries beyond their control across some pretty important positions. But they're going to have to turn up against Canberra 60s. Like you said, the game plan is simple: dominate through the forwards and let your the strengths of your halves and your fullback play true there. Don't get cute the way we did against the West Tigers. That's going to get you in trouble. It already got us in trouble once this season. Don't need to back it up. In saying that, this is going to be a tough game. Like, my heart says Parramatta Eels victory, But my head says that Canberra are also going to be looking to bounce back after getting absolutely dusted up by their coach after blowing the game against Cronulla. They're going to be at home, 6:15 p.m. Kickoff on Sunday is going to be nice and nippy out there. That plays into their favour. Parramatta are going to have to pull out a pretty good effort here to get the 2 points.
Yeah, so we're at that point of the podcast now where we go into our tips. So you just said about your head and your heart. Which way are you going, mate?
Oh, I mean, if I tipped with my head, it'd be a boring podcast. Come on. So Parramatta to win this one. I think this one is going to be tight, though. I know I've had some fun tipping big wins to Parramatta Eels. This one I think is going to be a gritty one. Maybe even when you see a gritty game in the NRL these days, though, it can still be surprisingly high scoring. I will tip a more modest scoring game, 18 or 20 points to the Eels, to the Canberra Raiders, 16 thereabouts. I think I'll go in that range there, 60s.
Okay. Well, you talked about tipping with your head or your heart. If I tipped with my fear factor, I would be, let's just say, if the Easter weekend Eels turn up to play down in Canberra, there would be a 20-point loss on the horizon. And you know what? I say that as a fear factor, but we can't afford for that team to turn up this week, because if you get a Raiders gritty Canberra home ground performance, there would be a big loss on the horizon. However, I'm going to tip with a combination of head and heart and say that the Eels are going to be as smarting about that loss last week as what the Raiders will be, that the Eels can own the middle, even though I think that the loss of Cardi from the forward pack took away both a skill component as well as someone who was hitting hard in defence.
Physicality, yeah.
That brutality aspect we're missing. But I think that I'd like to think there were lessons learned last week. I think it will be one of those games that we're going to feel very uncomfortable watching. I think it's going to end up with a scoreline of something like 30-28. I think it's going to be a 2-point game. And I think it's going to come down to something in the way of misfortune or a ref's call, or because I think it could go 2 points either way. But I'm going to tip the Eels to win by 2 points. So I'll go 30-28 to the Eels. Now, for my prediction for best on field, I think I'm going to pick Reg in this one. I think the engine room's going to step up, and I was trying to decide whether I went junior or Reg in that regard, but I think I'll go with Reg, and for first try scorer, I'll go with Gutho.
I was actually going to go for first try scorer, so I'll go somewhere else. So let's go with maybe Sean Lane. It was playing on that left edge with Dylan, and they get that combination right earlier in the game. Best on field, I do like the call out for Reg. If the Eels are going to dominate the middle, he's going to set the tone from the first tackle. But I'll also go a different direction there. And I'll go Guffer, I suppose. I'll swap things around there because it feels like the Eels are going to try and get him heavily involved to compensate for the loss of Mitchell Moses. And he's always a pretty good shout for one of our best three on the field.
I think in your tip for Sean Lane for first try scorer, if he's able to do that, then I will feel even more positive, because I think Sean has been down this season on his best.
Oh, without a doubt.
He's we're not seeing anything like the Sean Lane that we saw in 2022. We all know what injury did to him in 2023, but he's been out there in every game so far this year, and he's a long way from his best. So hopefully this game also marks one of his best games, because I think, as I recall, he was a dominant figure in a 2022 victory down in the nation's capital.
Yes.
So yeah, let's hope it's a happy hunting ground for him. So, and it would be nice for us to get a game against the Raiders up in Parramatta instead of be travelling.
It happens a lot the other way, doesn't it? Yeah. But let's wrap things up there, 60s. Again, a quick thank you to Big Swing Golf, North Mead, and Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Rowan, and Parramatta. Fantastic sponsors of our show. And as always, I'll let you sign things off.
Go, you mighty Eels.